It becomes the time, and I'd like to start this session. And can you hear my voice, students?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Mr.Higashi. I'm a member of Japan Society of Material Cycle and Waste Management, and also I'm from NTT Data Institute of Management Consulting. Today's tema is an introduction to disaster waste management. And first, I'd like to show the aim and scope of this lecture. First, this lecture tries to introduce ABC of disaster waste management. And secondly, this lecture is prepared for those who just starting having interest in disaster waste management. And after this lecture, you can proceed to more specific lectures on disaster waste management. This lecture is a kind of an introduction, the gateway to disaster waste management. And this is a kind of a message for myself. And disaster itself is hard to prevent, but damage by disasters can be prevented and attenuated by appropriate disaster waste management. Okay, I'd like to introduce today's character for the lecture. I'm a lecturer, Shintaro Higashi, and we have a student from Kyoto University. Could you introduce yourself?
So good evening, everybody. My name is Mahi, and I am from India, and I'm a master's first year student at Dr. Asari's lab. Nice to meet you all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shifa. I am an Indonesian student. I am from Institut Teknologi Bandung, and currently I belong in Terrestrial Ecosystem Management, Kyoto University. Nice to meet you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy, and I'm from the Solomon Islands. I am a Master Year 1 student at Kyoto University and joining the Laboratory of Environmental Education with Professor Asari. So pleased to meet you all. Thank you.
Hi, hello. My name is Tatsu. I'm from Japan, and now I'm a research student. After working for a company and Japan Overseas Cooperative Volunteers, I wanted to learn environmental education more, so I came here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so we have 4 students from Kyoto University, and we start the lecture now. And this is the content of today. What is disaster waste? How we can manage disaster waste and disaster waste management, and 5 views for disaster waste management. To learn more. So we go on to the first section. What is disaster waste? Types of disasters, issues of disaster waste, global rise in natural disaster, disasters in Asia and the Pacific, and specific disaster waste by type. First, regarding the type of disaster, and I'd like to know your image of disaster. How about Mahi-san?
I think that disasters are extreme events that can be made by nature or man, and they cause a lot of loss of livelihoods and a loss of property as well.
How about other members?
Yeah, for me, I think disasters, we can refer to them as any event that cause great damage. As Mahi-san mentioned, that a disaster can be a nature that it can cause by nature or human. So disasters can be different events that leading to different degrees of consequences. Depends on a community's vulnerability to different types of disasters. Yeah, thank you.
I also have something to add. So when I think about disaster, I think about some a sudden unfortunate event that can cause damage of properties, loss of life, and also hinder productivity.
Yes, my impression is it's very dangerous and scared because I've experienced 2 big earthquakes in 2011 and 1995.
Okay. I showed the example of disasters. So, could you tell Could you kindly tell the difference between those two groups, this group and this group?
Is it that the upper group is unavoidable and the lower group is avoidable? Is that the difference?
Good, almost correct. First group is natural disaster, and second group is man-made disaster. Today's lecture is focused on natural disaster. And one more question, a single line could divide natural disaster into other two groups. Where should we put single line?
Yes, excuse me, Higashi Sensei. I guess the line will be between, is it between storms and earthquake? Because like from my experience, in Pacific Island countries, we have experienced the 4 disasters in the Pacific. The upper 4 disasters, it's very common in the Pacific.
Sensei, the first to third water related.
Tracy, you're correct. And that's if landslide is caused by earthquake, you are correct. But landslides are often associated with heavy rain, so the line might be here. And the upper group is meteorological disaster, and the other group is a geophysical disaster.
Also, I think that climate change also plays a huge role in increasing the frequency and severity of disasters such as floods, droughts, heat waves, etc.
Yes, it is said that meteorological disasters become more frequent and intensifying due to the climate change. Okay, and next theme is issue of disaster waste. Could you imagine why disaster waste is considered as a problem?
I would like to say that perhaps disaster waste is a problem because there's no space to dispose the huge amount of disaster waste generated.
I have an idea which I would like to say as well. Waste generated during disasters can be harmful, and they can cause pollution to the environment as well as to human health. For example, during heavy rains, which can cause floods, and waste can be generated everywhere that producing bad odor. So those communities with waste poor management will suffer from remaining and piles up of waste being generated more. Thank you.
And also, in my opinion, the waste that is generated from a disaster that is piling up on the roads can hinder recovery and reconstruction.
Excellent. It is said that we should notice 2 issues. One is a large amount of waste at once, and the other is an obstacle for recovery and reconstruction. Yes. If you joined the symposium before, many panelists or some remarks refer to this point, large amount of waste at once, very short period. And that might be obstacle for recovery and reconstruction. And first point, the large amount of waste at once, the amount of that disaster waste could be equal to several years or tens of years of regular municipal waste amount. And for example, the disaster waste of Great East Japan earthquake, the amount of disaster waste is equal to 70% of annual domestic waste in Japan.
Wow, I see. That's kind of amazing, isn't it? What do you think, Tatsusa? What do you think about the volume?
Yeah, it's a very huge. I can imagine the volume. How should it be such a huge volume of waste?
It might take several years or more, but the basic policy is try to sort and recycle disaster waste. This slide try to show the issue of obstacle. And the disaster waste leads to many issues in terms of preserving living environment, and disaster waste might be obstacle for relief, recovery, and reconstruction stage. And actually, we have this kind of a specific negative impacts of disaster waste with disaster waste.
This makes me feel that we have to manage disaster waste really quick. And I also think we have to set a kind of priority, right? Because the amount will be too huge to manage at once.
Yes, we should segregate hazardous waste, etc. at first, and we will discuss this point, the issue of priority later. Okay, we go on to the next slide, and you can find two tendencies from this graph. One is rise in the past 50 years. And can you imagine the second tendency from this graph? The hint is a definition of disaster we discussed.
Yes. Oh, I just come up with the idea. It's water.
Great.
The disaster related to water is increasing.
I agree with Tatsu-san, and I think it is related to the climate change.
Okay, excellent. Number of disaster is increasing in 50 years due to climate change, especially for, you can see the steep rise in flood and storm, and that is related to water, and then that is the increase of this number might be due to climate change. Next graph. The graph shows the number of disaster by area. Can you find some tendency?
I think I can see that the rise in Asia is quite huge and it's quite astounding. And frankly, I can also attest to that. Being from India, just within the past 5 years, we've had so many intense and unprecedented disasters. And just last year, along with the COVID-19 pandemic, we had Cyclone Amphan and we had the Assam floods. So I can attest to the fact that the number of disasters are definitely on the rise in Asia. What do you think, Tracy?
Yes, my son. I also agree with you. Like from the graph, I can see that the trend for Oceania seems little somehow. But however, being a Pacific Islander myself, I also experienced that most islands in my country are frequently affected by natural disasters like tropical cyclone and flooding. These are all because of the effect of climate change.
I'd like to point out the social factors such as urbanization and population growth that exerts a large influence on disasters. The damage, including waste by one natural disaster, is becoming severer. So Tracy, I think the number of disasters don't increase so much in the Pacific, in Oceania. However, the damage of disaster seems to increase by social factors. So I think you have an impression about increasing the number of disaster in Oceania. So we go on to next one. Yeah, actually, many disasters occurred in Asia and the Pacific in these 20 years.
Being from Indonesia, I can confirm that. So Indonesia has been experiencing numbers of geological and meteorological disasters. You can name it, earthquakes, and then volcanic eruptions, storms, droughts, etc. In fact, in 2019, the National Disaster Mitigation Agency in Indonesia has recorded more than 3,600 natural disasters across the country. And they were dominated by hydrometeorological phenomena such as tornadoes, floods, and landslides. And also, Huge natural disasters such as floods and typhoons also attack several other Southeast Asian countries, such as Thailand, Myanmar, and the Philippines.
Yes, dear.
Yeah, I also want to add on to what Sifa-san just mentioned. Like, if I compare the Pacific Islands with the Asia, seems like the degree of disasters in the Pacific might be less. For example, we might face earthquake, but the damage it brings is less compared to the effects that are caused by flooding and tropical cyclone. So these are the various types of disaster that frequently occur especially in my country, Solomon Island.
Yeah, maybe you can imagine how the variety of disasters, and this picture is Nepal, and this is flood in Thailand. This is Vanuatu, Pacific. This is a typhoon attacked in Philippines, and this is a Great East Japan earthquake. We'd like to see the picture of a specific disaster. This picture shows the disaster waste in the Philippines, and several typhoons attack the Philippines every year.
Wow. We can see the ship. I remember the TV news of tsunami. Just Great East earthquake just 10 years ago.
I see. I can also see that a lot of the waste that's being generated here is perhaps mostly wood, because the main color I see is brown. So maybe that's the nature of the waste that's generated here.
Okay, so we go on to next one. This is an earthquake, Sulawesi earthquake in 2018 in Indonesia. Liquefaction destroyed the affected area.
Yeah, I saw the news. That was terrible. And Indonesia also experienced devastating tsunamis and a 9.1 magnitude of earthquakes in Aceh 2004. And but I cannot say that I'm sure about how the management of the disaster waste was carried out.
Yes, Shifa, when you mentioned the 2004 earthquake, I could relate because that happened even in India, in Chennai. So I was very young then and I was very shocked. And also, if I look at this picture, the image color is mostly gray compared to the previous one. I don't see a lot of wood, but I see a lot of building rubbles, metals, and maybe that's the nature of the waste generated here.
Here, you notice important points. We should know the character of waste by types of disaster. And we should consider countermeasures and policy accordingly. And maybe you can clearly understand the type of waste is different in case of typhoon and in case of earthquake. And that kind of preparedness based upon type of disaster and the type of waste is very important. This shows tropical cyclone and flood in the Pacific.
Well, that's so familiar. Like, in fact, Pacific Island countries, they are very developing islands, like most of it, and most of the main cities are also located in the coastal areas as well. So, like during disasters, most of the waste scenes are green waste that being ended up into the ocean, especially during flood and coastal erosion. And also in addition, the effect of, like, I believe that this all are effect of climate change and sea level rise that is the biggest factor now.
We should arrange proper disaster waste management to save the rich nature in the Pacific, because I love beautiful Pacific nature.
Yes, actually, we are afraid that these disaster waste will be flowing to the ocean. And I think at this point, we should I think to consider proper disaster waste management, we should consider proper waste management in normal time as well. Okay, we go on to next one, and I think you can have an image of disaster and disaster waste. So this session tried to show you the basic how we can manage disaster waste management. So basic of disaster waste management. First, in the basic flow of treating disaster waste. Second point is the management cycle and plans, and last one is a contingency plan. Okay. Again, disaster itself is very hard to prevent. However, damage by disaster can be prevented and attenuated by appropriate countermeasures. That is an importance of disaster waste management, especially on preparedness, as a disaster waste management as a preparedness to disaster. This tries to show the basic flow of disaster waste management. Firstly, we decisively need planning and management before the outbreak of disaster. And the first flow is the cleaning and the collection of disaster waste. Secondly, we should storage and try to separate such disaster waste as much as possible. Then, based upon such sorting, segregation, or separation, we should consider the actual treatment, including recycle. So they are use recycle. It's not one thing reduce, but we should reduce the amount of final disposal. The point is, we should not transfer disaster waste directly to final disposal. We should try to store and try to segregate as much as possible.
I see. At first, I thought that all the waste that was generated from the disaster was transferred to the final disposal site.
Yes, I heard that in case of Great East Japan earthquake, more than 80% of disaster waste was recycled.
But that's it was perhaps possible mostly because it's Japan. You know, we have good technology here. I feel maybe in most countries in the Asia and the Pacific, perhaps it might be difficult to recycle 80% of the disaster waste.
Yes, I agree with Mahisan. I think disaster waste for places like Pacific countries is an additional problem, I would say, because there is no waste facilities where at least waste can be recycled to lessen the volumes of waste. Even recycling in normal time is already a huge problem, especially for my own country. Yeah.
Yes, we should consider disaster waste management with reality. Japan model will not be applicable to all countries. However, the policy of disaster waste management is all the same. Planning, collection, storage and separation, and treatment, including 3R. And we try to think the localized or each model of this cycle to the Asia and Pacific. This figure describes the management cycle and plans. Before outbreak of disaster, we should prepare contingency plan, CP. If a disaster happens, implementation plan will be developed based upon contingency plan. And experience of these disaster waste management in each stage should be reflected to contingency plan.
I see. Okay, it seems similar to the plan, do, check, act cycle, doesn't it?
Yes. This is a kind of a PDCA cycle for disaster waste management.
I have a question, Higashi Sensei. How can we develop such a contingency plan?
Okay, please go to the next slide. I tried to show the basic contents of contingency plan, but actually, we should discuss many items. However, the basic point might be these 9 items. Contingency plan should contain following item at least. Based upon contingency plan, implementation plan will be prepared after the outbreak of disaster. So first point is the institutional framework on disaster waste management. Officer, team organization for disaster waste management, and we should identify stakeholders, their expectation and their role or responsibility. And we also should involve community. Next one is treatment flow. As we discussed, we have to identify disaster type. We should collect disaster waste information, and we should prepare waste management inventory. And this is a relation with a strong relation with waste management in normal time. And we should enhance awareness and outreach. Of course, we should develop the law, regulation, and budget. This is very critical to disaster waste management, and we should identify which law, which regulation is best law for disaster waste management. And if we don't have, we should prepare such kind of regulation or some framework for law or framework, legal framework. And yes, we need capacity development, including various stakeholders. We should conduct workshop, training, site visit, awareness building, etc. That is key concept of contingency plan.
Higashi Sensei, I think it's interesting, but I think, in my opinion, it's easier said than done. And my question is, how can we prepare a contingency plan for disaster waste?
I think prior to consider specific contingency plan, we have to conduct a baseline study for each item. And we should discuss ideal disaster waste management with stakeholders.
Knowing as is and discussing to be, I think I would like to try.
I think the process itself, try to identify these factors and try to discuss with stakeholders. The process itself is very important to prepare a contingency plan, I think. This is a very basic of disaster waste management. Maybe you can learn the basic. And today, I'd like to introduce 5 points for disaster waste management. Estimating the amount of disaster waste, coordinating relevant stakeholders, handling, managing hazardous waste, and management and utilization of disaster waste, the infrastructure of disaster waste, the importance of preparing the temporary storage site, TSS, before a disaster. So at first, I'd like to show the basic importance of estimating the disaster waste, estimating just amount. So before disaster happen, we should estimate the amount of disaster waste before disaster waste happen, because we should, based upon that amount, it might be huge, we should consider the preparation for disaster waste based upon specific amount of waste. And after disaster happen, based upon the estimation, before disaster happen, we should estimate the amount of disaster waste in affected area. Then we should develop implementation plan according to the amount of disaster waste. This is a methodologies. So estimated amount of disaster waste is calculated by number of damaged buildings multiplied by disaster waste generation intensity. It's very simple.
Excuse me, Higashi Sensei. The way the formula stands out, it seems easier than I imagine. That is if it's straightforward. Or what do you think, Mahi-san?
I personally think that it's kind of a little difficult, maybe, because I don't know how to calculate the number of damaged buildings and the disaster waste generation intensity. How do we know that?
Yes, me too, Mahi-san. I can't understand at all. More easy to estimate the amount of disaster waste.
Yeah, actually, we have another lecture next week, and if you want to learn more, you can see that you can join that lectures. The lecture will show the specific methodology and data collection. You will be able to utilize public data or information to estimate the amount of disaster waste, for example, using the data of World Bank or by using Google Map. I think you can learn the specific methodologies to estimate the amount of disaster waste by that lecture. Okay, but I think I like to, I want you to understand the importance of estimating, and there are these methodologies. And second one is coordinating relevant stakeholders. This try to show a kind of a cycle of disaster waste management. And we should identify stakeholders of disaster waste management each stage before disaster happens. For example, at the center, we have a government. They are in charge of policy and planning. And regarding waste discharge, the business sector, industry sector, and the community households, they are source of waste. Regarding 3 hours and waste collection, there might be private collectors or public collectors or community. They are in charge of collect and they should try to recycle as much as possible. And we should have an intermediate treatment, try to segregate. In here, we have a strong relation with the waste management sector in normal time. And yes, and the residue should go to final disposal. There is a contractor who manage final disposal site. And the total point is the gas community. They are in charge of such kind of cycle. This is ordinary waste management cycle. But these stakeholders are also should be involved in disaster waste management.
So Higashi Sensei, just to confirm, to ensure a proper disaster waste management, the stakeholders include not only public sectors, but also private sectors and communities.
Yes, you should imagine who should develop policy and who will be in charge of operation on the ground in each state. And if we cannot find appropriate stakeholders in the specific states, that might be missing point of disaster waste management.
Based on my understanding, if I'm not wrong, I think most of the stakeholders for disaster waste management are they perhaps the same as normal waste management?
Yes, I can confirm that too. Like from my experience, I think involvement of stakeholders is one of the things that is missing in most of the disaster waste procedures. So I personally think that the involvement of stakeholders in waste management at normal times will also lead to proper coordination and management of waste during disaster times.
Yes, and in general, stakeholders for disaster waste means from disaster line and the waste management line. Disaster management line and the waste management line should collaborate well, even before disaster happens. That might be another point. These stakeholders are mainly waste person, waste line. However, we should involve some person from disaster risk management. Including this topic, we have another lecture next week, and you can learn more about the actual coordination of stakeholders in another lecture. Third point is handling hazardous waste. Could you imagine what kind of waste should be prioritized?
We should pick variables. They can be exchanged for money, such as plastics, metals, etc. They are easy to sort from waste.
But what about wet waste? Because I think they are the kind of waste that they can, get rot quickly. So it's important to get rid of them as quickly as possible as well.
Your point might be correct, but there might be other ways to be prioritized.
Higashi Sensei, what about infectious waste? Because I think it will definitely spread diseases to other people.
That might be a good point. And maybe in case of the COVID-19, we are very anxious about managing infectious waste from hospital or something. And okay, our recommendation is we should prioritize the treatment management, in particular, the hazardous waste or infectious waste, food waste or something, and that waste should be identified and segregated immediately. For example, Maki-san, do you have any image of hazardous waste?
I'm actually not sure what specific hazardous waste means, to be honest.
Yeah. Sorry for the questioning. Next, try to show the example of the management of asbestos. One of the hazardous waste generated by disasters. Asbestos as an example of hazardous waste. Though asbestos has chemical stability, the use of and production have been banned worldwide for health hazards reasons. Asbestos consisting waste and asbestos containing waste should be removed immediately from the place where people do activities. And this picture tries to show the actual operation. Yes, after the outbreak of disaster, these asbestos are exposed. We should try to take that asbestos by using mask, glove, gowns, because asbestos is very health hazard substance. We should keep in the bag carefully. Not only collect, but also we should store carefully and try to transport with care. Then we should dispose in the very safe place. That is a typical image of managing a kind of hazardous waste.
If I may add something, I feel like this seems kind of difficult to practice in our countries in the Asia Pacific because we don't have the facility to treat them.
I think you can utilize local tools. It is important to identify risks of hazardous waste and consider the treatment before disaster happens. Ideally, you should point out some factories or some old buildings that might contain asbestos beforehand, and you should think about some specific treatment of such this hazardous waste like asbestos. Here again, next week we have another lecture to how to handling managing hazardous waste. Okay, let's go to next topic. Infrastructure of disaster waste. And could you remember this figure? I think we discussed based upon this figure.
These figures, I think it shows the basic flow of treating disaster waste, isn't it?
Yes. And we should consider the specific infrastructure of disaster waste management for especially this storage and separation and final disposal.
But unfortunately, Indonesia doesn't have sufficient and well-distributed facilities like Japan.
Even in Japan, there is no permanent facilities for disaster waste.
We should manage such facilities after the outbreak of disaster based upon contingency plan. Our recommendation is secure TSS, temporary storage site, and final disposal site at least. Disaster waste should be reused and recycled as much as possible and managed adequately at landfills. And we should consider appropriate facility and infrastructures. And This is a image of TSS and the final disposal site. And ideally, we should secure the space with temporary storage site before the outbreak of disasters. And regarding the infrastructure, we should bear in mind that disaster waste management and the general waste management are inextricably linked. And I'd like to show some image, and this is, do you know where is this, Tatsan?
Yes. Oh, this is a temporary storage site in Japan. It's a familiar landscape.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I thought the temporary storage site in Japan was a bit modernized and mechanized.
Yeah, even in Japan, temporary storage site is just we should utilize such kind of vacant land. Next one is a picture of Nepal. They sorted metal and woods to utilize in future.
I feel like if suppose another earthquake happens, then such kind of a TSS might be collapsed, isn't it?
Yes, and we can appreciate their efforts to try to recycle such disaster waste. But as you say, this site is very near to the houses, and maybe we should consider alternative for the TSS. And this is TSS in Indonesia. The symbol says, "Do not throw away waste here."
Yeah, yes, you can say. I think from this picture, I can see that this might be a temporary storage site and not a final disposal site.
This sign is very important. They declare this site is not a disposal site. They declare this site is a temporary storage site to be recovered, I think. Okay, we will go to next slide. The next one is a final example of final disposal. Final disposal site is prepared as a facility for normal waste management. This is a final disposal site in Fiji, a typical sanitary landfill. This is, I don't say the place, typical dump site. They just allocate this place as a dump site.
If I may add something, based on these pictures, I can see that the capacity of the final disposal site is pretty limited, and I definitely cannot accept all the disaster waste that's generated.
Can I add on as well? Yes, my son. In that case, it's better to secure a temporary storage site, and that will make it possible to try and sort out and segregate waste as much as possible.
Also, I think, in my opinion, it is quite rare to find such temporary storage site in the city, as there is little to no space for it.
Yeah, maybe you can understand the importance of securing thesis, but there's no present. I like to show one good practice in Samoa. They secured a temporary storage site besides the final disposal site. So this is a whole site for this final disposal site, and they don't allocate all the land to the final disposal site. They have some expansion land, and they assigned one land for this temporary storage site. At first, some disaster waste is transferred to this temporary storage site, and they try to segregate, and the sorted soil will be utilized as cover material of final disposal site. That is one idea that we should prepare TSS besides final disposal site. So I think there is some countermeasure, but we should share such kind of experience in Asia and Pacific. The fifth point is TSS. We learn the basic policy of disaster waste management. Set up TSS and try to segregate and recycle. We will discuss preparing TSS before disaster happens. These try to show the risk of not good TSS operation. If TSS open at unsuitable land, that might be environmental risk for resident. We should need quickly remove from that area. Second point is if TSS open late, yes, hinders and risk for recovery. Of course, they might be environmental risk because they're containing various waste, including infectious waste or some hazardous waste. And if prepared TSS open, at last, the cost of treatment and the cost time of disposal is will be longer. So it's very important to identify appropriate temporary storage site quickly, and we should discuss beforehand which space will be suitable. I will show the picture. Sorry, before that, I will show the specific TSS place, and this is a criteria for temporary storage site. Access is easy for just a victim. The site is not too close to residential areas. The site is not adjusted to water source, rivers, canals, swamps, ponds, lake, and drainage. On the site is not under high risk of flooding, and the site is publicly owned and maintained, hopefully. Farmland should be avoided because there is a possibility just a waste might produce such farmland, and the land should have large spaces for disaster waste management. I will show the picture. Yes. Yes. How do you think about using this place as a temporary storage site?
This is a park, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If we use here as a TSS, children lost place to play.
That might be a good point from relief from disaster.
I also think that there seem to be many houses around, so perhaps the residents won't allow this place to be a TSS, where waste can be transferred. Maybe.
So it seems this place should not be selected, but it depends on the situation. If they don't have any vacant space, maybe we can utilize the park as temporary storage site for just only dry waste only or so. So maybe you don't realize that some issue about this place, but the important thing is we should discuss the availability of this place with stakeholders. And next one is here. Visual.
Higashi Sensei,
Yes.
to me this place seems very spacious, and there is also no residents around. Or what do you think, Sifa?
I think this might be a car park. Higashi Sensei, do you think the landowner will allow it to be used as a temporary storage site?
So if this is a car park, we can utilize a TSS, I think. But it is important to identify such space and discuss with owner before disaster happens. Some other agency for disaster risk reduction might consider this place as an evacuation center or something. So identify and discussion with stakeholders before disaster happen is really important. I think so. This might be suitable if landowner say yes, or if the other stakeholder does not use this place. So next one is this picture. How about this place?
Yes. We could find water, and the water might contaminate water resources.
But there are residents beside, and this place looks like a mangrove swamp, which I believe people might depend on them for fishing and other source of food. I'm afraid if another disaster happens, for example, a flood due to heavy rains, the flood will, carry away the disaster waste into the swamps. Will cause another additional problem for the community as well.
Tracy, you pointed out very good point, and you might be a specialist for selecting TSS in the Pacific. So I think this place might not, but again, it depends on the situation. So it's very important to try to identify and discuss the availability of place. The next place is here. This area is land secure, prepared for expansion of road.
Maybe this site can work out because the owner might be public sector, so it perhaps will be easier to get permission to use this as a TSS.
And I also think that this is a good place because I can see that it has good access as it's located on the side of the road.
Yeah, it looks okay, I think, since there are no residents around the site.
I feel something. Yeah, to Greenland, I got it. The site is not spacious. If the expansion site is secure for several kilometers, it might be okay.
I think you pointed out a very good point, and that's it seems to be very small for temporary storage site. However, these space are secured along several kilometers, or they have some more expansion area that might be suitable. Again, I think I recommend you to find appropriate site around your home or at your home country by using Google Map or something, and try to find vacant one, and you should discuss with owner or some other stakeholders. For example, in Fiji, I found a rugby field, and I asked them how about using that rugby field for temporary storage site, but they heavily say no, because that rugby is a relief. They applied. If they see such rugby field is filled with waste, their mind for reconstruction will be decreased. That point should be considered. Okay, almost we finished that lecture. Then, if you want to learn more, I'd like to introduce some materials to learn. And this is guideline, disaster waste management guideline for Asia and Pacific, prepared for those who involved in disaster waste management. And today's session is largely based upon this guideline. And if you have interest, you can go through and you can learn more about the disaster waste management. If you want more specific issues in the guideline, we have 5 materials for disaster waste management in terms of technical aspect. Maybe you can understand these 5 topics is similar to today's lecture: estimating the amount of disaster waste and coordinating remote stakeholders, handling, managing hazardous waste, and management and utilization of disaster waste in terms of infrastructure, and preparing temporary storage site before disaster. Next week, we have these 5 lectures to go on to more detail about such 5 topics. And if you miss the lecture, you can see the video from the archive. Trust. This is a useful link. This is a link to Ministry of Environment Japan. They introduced the disaster waste management activity in Japan, and also they try to share some video pictures based upon specific Japan disasters. For example, TSS, final disposal site, something, etc. And you can visit this Japan Society of Material Cycle and Waste Management website. They have an archive of technical tools, video, today's video as well, and some other useful material to learn disaster waste management. Okay, today's lesson is over, and that's all for today. Could you let me your impression for disaster waste management and today's lecture?
I'd like to go first and start off by saying that this lecture has really given me a new perspective about disasters entirely. Usually, when we talk about disaster management, we don't consider the waste aspect. We usually concentrate on relief and such things. However, looking at disaster waste management, it's a big issue, and we really have to learn how to manage it, especially with the number of disasters rising in the world. So I think it's a very important lecture and very important for all of us to be educated for sure.
I totally agree with Mahi, and also my home country is located on the Pacific Ring of Fire. It has a lot of active volcanoes and it's highly prone to disasters. So besides the evacuation and reconstruction effort, managing the waste from the disaster is also necessary. And I think this lecture covered a lot of grounds, like to make us more prepared for the next disaster. And I think it's a very good start, introduction to the disaster waste management.
Higashi Sensei, I would like to add on as well. First of all, yeah, thank you, Higashi Sensei. I personally feel that today's lecture on disaster waste is worth it. I will say that nearly every island have felt the effect of climate change and changing of weather patterns. So natural disasters tend to occur more than we can imagine nowadays. And of course, disaster waste from the damage, the disaster wasted from the damage to pose a high risks, both environmental and as well as to human health. So I hope everyone get a good knowledge about what disaster waste management is. And I think that is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, Higashi Sensei, today I've learned a lot for the first time. Many things that seemed fine at the first glance contained many problems. We have to think more carefully, and I think it's important to be prepared from normal time. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, and I'm very pleased that you seem to understand well about the disaster waste management. Again, this is the message, and disaster is very hard to prevent, but damage by disaster can be prevented and attenuated by appropriate countermeasure. And to consider proper disaster waste management, the preparedness is a key. Disaster waste management begins before the disaster happens. Okay, thank you very much for joining today. That's all. Bye bye, and maybe we will go to a photo session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So just waving your hand. Thank you for wearing your natural costume. Looks very nice.